So next up, we have this one from Preach. Final Fantasy XIV Alliance raids a better catch-up system than World of Warcraft. I'm curious.
Undeniably, there are little bits of Final Fantasy XIV that I haven't talked about at all, despite me doing them several times, and I really want to bash them out here. Like, this would be like the Alexander raid, or really the Coils of Bahamut. I haven't talked about those yet, but one thing that constantly comes up with what did you think is the Alliance raids. These are the larger scale raids, where there's like 24 people, 16 people, all bashing together to get into content.
What
I'll
do
be
you
honest
think
with you,
about
up
the
until
Alliance
recently,
raids?
I was really confused about how this system worked because it shows some strange aspects in design that you only notice, I think, when you're doing the game more modernly and not when it was released. So we had to dig into the archives
Yes,
and start
Ash,
researching
remember,
some old FF14 content creators to really make sense of what I was seeing. So let's take a look at that.
Personally, if you guys want to know my thoughts on Alliance raids, I think they're really cool. I wish that, I don't know, I kind of wish that you didn't necessarily need to organize through Discords in order to get access to like the harder versions. Because like you have the Lubrum Regini Savage, which you can kind of just queue into, but it becomes a little bit of a mess. It's like I want them to be more challenging, but at the same time, I don't want to be like dependent on Discord servers in order to set them up. So I don't know if there would be like some kind of a system that we could have in game. But yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit torn on the difficulty there. But like in terms of the raids themselves, they're freaking fantastic. Like I still remember the first time that I jumped into the Nier raids. That to me was just friggin' magical. I love those. So yeah, only a grade in the first 2-3 weeks. I don't know. I like them. Like I could run Nier right now. I might even run Nier before the reset because I have some unaugmented Crypt Lurker pieces that I might end up augmenting. What about the Rakasha Soon 8 of I can't see boots right now, Jay. Like tell me later when I'm actually in game. We can check it out.
The Alliance raids. As I said, I was a little confused by this concept. So let me set the scene for some fellow WoW.
Somebody is using G-Shade. Yes, you are.
Ex-WoW players or current WoW players, and then understand where my confusion came from with this. My first experience with the Alliance raiding, which again is just the larger scale raiding in Final Fantasy, was actually after I'd finished A Realm Reborn. And people were like, have you done the Crystal Tower? I was like, I've not done the Crystal Tower. It's like, oh, it's a whole raid thing. I was like, what? What?
You have to do.
What? And I was firstly confused that the main story hadn't kind of pushed me over there, as it tends to do with the main raids, which is now where I'm seeing and now understand how they set this up in-game. So let me clarify that for you. They have basically one raid per expansion. So far, I've only come to the end of heavensward. So in A Realm Reborn, that would be the Coils of Bahamut. It's one raid, whereas in WoW, obviously, we're used to several raids throughout an expansion's life cycle. And what they do is they release as part of that raid. So their 0.1 patch would have, say, 4 of those bosses. You're not going to see the next 4 bosses of the same raid until the 0.2 patches, and then similarly again you'll get the finale in like the 0.3, etc, etc, etc. But it is ultimately one raid with one continuous, and obviously it's Final Fantasy, a very, very involved story. But they do make the effort to push you to go and check that out, because it often involves main story characters. Characters you'd be very interested in, such as Alice and Rurikhan. Those people are dealing with stuff over there, and probably Alphino in some ways showing up, because of course he is. Now, I did all that stuff because I was fully aware of it, but then the Alliance raiding. Go and check out the Crystal Tower. So I initially thought the Crystal Tower would be something like a Torghast or something along those lines, because I know that kind of stuff does exist.
Tower.
But what did I find? It was the Alliance raids. But it kind of confused me, because at this point, I was still kind of under the impression that when a new raid or a new thing drops, you kind of get all of it. First thing that was interesting is that although there was a certain main story character, it wasn't all of them. And what I found, I should say, is that it was extremely story-rich and involving brand new characters that just seemingly had appeared from nowhere. I was like, oh, okay. Now, nearly everything involving the main game, like
it's so funny to see how World of Warcraft players get, because I was surprised too, obviously, but it's funny to see World of Warcraft players that like come into 14 and they're like, there's story in here. What? There's a story thing here. What does this mean?
The main core of the game involves a certain subtext of about 12 characters, but this didn't. This actually started introducing different characters coming out from nowhere with their own independent, very, very rich story, an extremely good story. So I head into the Alliance raid, and lo and behold, there's the rest of the group. So the first thing that surprised me about this is, on my initial impression, was that you are 24 people, but you're not together. You can only interact with your 8-man party as you would do in an ordinary raid. It's basically 3 independent 8-man parties. You are all together. But
you want to know one of the hardest things for me that I still haven't learned how to do, and it's actually a little bit shameful to admit that I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to resurrect other healers because I play on a controller. I have no idea how I can revive people from other alliances. Like, they're screwed. They're screwed with me. They're just like, Rurikhan, res somebody from another alliance. Like, I don't know how to do that. Just click them on the alliance window. Yeah, sure. So let me wait. There's no. I'd need like a trackball. I mean, you can go into virtual mouse mode, but obviously that can't be the answer. Like, if you're going to tell me, go into virtual mouse mode, it's like, oh, so let me get this straight. In this raid where things are going completely terrible, you want me to actively stop healing the few people that are still alive so that I can use my virtual cursor with a fucking analog stick to go click on a random alliance member. Yes. L1 and left and right on D-pad? No, I don't think that's how it works. Is it? Wait, do you play on PlayStation? No, I play on PC. I mean, I play on PC and on PlayStation. I play on both. Press select to navigate your cursor to the Alliance party list. Oh, you can do that? I didn't know that. You can have mouse and crossbar at the same time. Yeah, the thing is, you can't access the crossbar if you have virtual mouse, because when you have virtual mouse, the crossbar is there, but your L2 and R2 are doing left click and right click. I don't know if I have my thing set up that way, Cody. That's the thing, because I don't have the default controls. But anyway, it's just a little.
But if you have an ability like an intervene or something where you can move to a friendly player, you can only use it in your set 8-man group. So I found that really interesting, because of course my initial thoughts going into here would be, oh, it's a 24-man raid, so we're all together as one big team.
No, we're not.
More players. But that's not the case. They very clearly...
It's actually a competition, Preach. It's a competition. Whenever there's 3 targets, the alliance that kills their target first clearly establishes dominance over the rest of the group. That's how it works.
Segment you into 3 independent groups, although you are together in the one arena. So, going in, I was obviously a little struck by this, but then it sort of started to make sense. At first, I thought it was probably just a technical limitation. They've designed most things to work around the 8-man core, but what it actually allowed you to do very easily was see who was in your group. And then the idea started to form is like, oh, they're going to present very different challenges. Typically 3, because they have 3 tanks and things like that.
Which is pretty cool.
That are going to deal with different aspects of the fight. Group A is going to deal with this, Group B is going to deal with this, and Group C is going to deal with this.
And here's the default setting. Group A deals with ads, Group B deals with boss, and Group C can do whatever the hell they want most of the time.
And my first entry into the Crystal Tower was exactly like that. It was like, you need
Group
to
C
attack
does
the
whatever
tail,
leftover
you need to
mechanic
attack
is
the
left.
head, you need to deal with the ads that spawn, and each group had its own job to overcome a target. I found this very, very enjoyable. I thought it was super fun and a nice twist on raiding. What I was also surprised by was how much more spectacular the bosses were in the Alliance raiding. How much more setup, how much more theme, how much more bombastic they were than the even already super bombastic raiding that they had for the 8-man groups. This thing was really quite a spectacle. So that got me thinking as well, is what's going on with this? Why is this so much more pizzazz, because the fights weren't particularly difficult. But
I mean, I guess
they had some coordination, and they were just so much more on display. There was so much more happening. And I thought, and my initial impression would be, for a much larger group size, especially with the crazy spell effects that happen in FF14, yes, I know I can switch them off if I want to, that they would then turn up the theme. They would turn up the spectacle. They would turn it up beyond its already very, very, very extravagant style. And then something weird happened. I killed the first 3 bosses, the first raid. Wonderful setting, really beautiful. Then I went to the next part, the Circus Tower. And the mechanics had changed. Now, given my World of Warcraft history, this obviously caught me by, this is strange. These fights work differently. And it's not something you would probably notice if you were clearing it one time just to get it done or just to see the story. It's something you would only notice if you've been analyzing MMO games for the last, 10, 15 years. And I immediately was like, this is a bit weird. It's changed the style. It's thematically different. And it's the same feeling I got with Coils of Bahamut, where you could clearly see at the start they tried to duplicate sort of a World of Warcraft style, and then moved away from it. Rather quickly, at least it seems. So I took note.
Almost as if Yoshi P was like, I've gotten as much inspiration as I should get from World of Warcraft. It's time to leave. I think anything else that I bring over is just going to be bad. Let's just focus on the good stuff and move onwards.
Of this, I didn't think much of it because I thought maybe it's just a different style of boss. It could have just been the way they paced it out. And then we got to the end, the World of Darkness, which is the most... it's fantastic story stuff. I shouldn't need to keep repeating that for FF. But really fantastic. And again, super over the top. And they changed the style again. And it was very noticeable to me. I didn't think... But we're going to go to heavensward because I didn't think much of it. I just had fun. Okay? I just had a lot of fun. We didn't do it minimum item level, so I wasn't expecting a super difficult thing or anything like that. I just wanted to check it out and see what it was like, and I kind of had that one-time through experience. Then we get to Heavensward, and I finished the Heavensward main story, and I'm thinking I haven't seen the Alliance raid yet. Yet, there is a quest sitting in my log that they did make me aware of called Sky Pirates. Now, unfortunately, it was revealed to me that that's the Alliance raid for Heavensward. I was like, oh, okay, so they have done another one. Because at that point, I kind of figured they'd maybe dropped the idea, or it was something that was going to come later, or something that would appear during the main story, or it was a side thing that I just hadn't found yet. But there I had this Sky Pirates thing. And once again, this time, a more independent story than the one in A Realm Reborn. Involving none of the main story characters. At all. Completely brand new characters, and surprisingly, extremely story-rich. More so than A Realm Reborn. I'm talking 20 to 25 minutes of setup, character introduction, building up a rapport, understanding the motivations, the whole thing. And I was like, this is interesting compared to what I'm used to. It's like, this is a really new thing. It's like, here's these brand new characters. Some of them have got charisma, some of them are evil, some of them are doing strange things. We've got a whole new area in terms of a sky base. Interesting again. And so we go into this raid, and it was nothing like I expected. I mean, I do have to give special shouts here to the Void Ark, and just how sinister and evil that place is, and how wacky and, you just feel like you're in hell in there. And then immediately, when we finished that, another good 30, 40 minutes of story to build up to the next part, conclusions being drawn, what's the next plan of attack.
The important thing to mention here is that these are released, you get one raid, one Alliance raid, then there's a quest line. So you get a quest line to set up, and then you get a raid, and then you get a quest line to kind of wrap up the thing that you just did. And then afterwards, you get another quest line to set up the next raid, and so on and so forth. And it repeats itself. So it's not just okay, here's the raid, here's the quest line, here's the raid. The way in which the game, the content is supposed to be experienced is a lot different than someone who's coming in later is going to experience it. Because people coming in later, particularly me, with some of these raids, I was like, damn, there's a lot of quests in between these raids. But you have to think about it. It's that's because that's all there was there when that raid came out. And then they released another raid, and then there were more quests because, again, that's all that was there when it came out. I liked Void Ark. I didn't think it was particularly special or memorable to me because I don't remember most of it at this point. I did do it. But my favorite Alliance raid is still Near. Near to me, it's very near and dear to my heart. Got him. But yeah, and the Ivalice raids. Okay, look, Ivalice raids are really for people that are into Final Fantasy 12 and Final Fantasy Tactics. If you're not, like, I struggled with that quest. You guys know, I was on stream. I struggled a lot with the quests to those raids.
Moving on to something called the Weeping City. Now, after seeing something as spectacular as the Void Ark, how on earth are they not going to use that place again? It's a giant spaceship fueled by coffins of death. How are they not using that again? But they didn't. An entirely new zone is built and constructed for part 2 of the Alliance raid. And you don't go back to the Void Ark. And I was like, what? Really? You've built this monstrous, colossal place and you're not going to use it again? And in fact, what you've done is built a second, brand new, equally as colossal place for the next part. And then they did it again for the third part. And once again, the mechanics of the bosses were distinct.
And here you can see that Preach is used to Blizzard just like recycling content. And Yoshi P is like, nah, make it new. Let's make a new one. Let's go. It's like, fuck, that's old, man. We've done that. Let's go. Next one.
Completely different. So, this is where I had to start doing some research. I had to understand what I was seeing here from a gameplay standpoint, from a Squeenix standpoint, trying to understand the minds and attitudes that were going on here. And what do I find out is this is actually the catch-up system. I didn't know this until this point. That's why I'm telling you this little story. I didn't know this. So the way they actually do this is they release their main raid, the Coils of Bahamut, Alexander. And then in the 0.5 patches, that's when you get the Alliance raid. So you get a piece of raid content every single patch. Right? For the most part, your 0.1s, your 0.5s, your 0.1s, your 0.5s, you get these next pieces of the pie. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And now more pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. And this is where we had to start doing some research. So I sent our wonderful, wonderful staff member, Bex, and she went off to find out what were the initial impressions of the Alliance raids. Now, this isn't particularly easy to do, because there apparently isn't many, if any, really, FF14 content creators who dug into stuff as deeply as we would over here, and several of the WoW content creators would have done, into looking into what's going on, and seeing what the feedback is, and putting that all together so we can look back through the timeline, like I could do on my history on my channel, and feel, what did I think about at the time? Because our opinions change all the time. One thing, you love something, and then something doesn't work out. AKA Torghast. Loved it when it was first impression. Not so much now. And what do I find? Is that they do have these gaps from the 0.5s to the 0.5s to make this stuff. And it is optional. Why? It's the catch-up system for the people who don't enjoy doing the hard mode raiding. And then it started to fall into place to me. They do release the Coils of Bahamut and Alexander, but not everybody's going to go into the Savage version of those, because they just don't enjoy that stuff. They're there for the story, they want to see the bosses, they want to have a good time, they might have a little bit of progress to do in there in normal, but they don't want to jump into the Savage style, where they're doing the full waltz in order to try and defeat these bosses. They're just not into that. What they do love, though, is the FF story, as many people do. And then, they fall a little bit behind on gear and things like that. They're missing out on some stuff. So here comes the Alliance raids. They're not as hard, but they are bigger, so they allow a lot of the player base, which makes sense, because this is for more of the casual player base. Larger group of people than are pushing Savage compared to what's out there. So get a lot more people in and enjoy it. They make it more fun because it's more story-based. So it's more ridiculous and over the top without being too difficult. But that's not to say that the whole thing's too easy. Absolutely not. And in fact, I got very heavily accused of cheesing, or even one person suggested I was disrespecting the content, which is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard, by not doing a minimum mic level, no echo. And
what? I can't believe you would disrespect the content like this, Preach. I expected better from you. That's some next level gatekeeping, dude. What the fuck? Disrespecting the content? That's the same, dude. That's the same thing, guys. Remember when people were like criticizing Hengist because he got lucky and got a Black Knight halberd? People were like, oh my God, you can't believe Rurikhan, you need to force him not to use the Black Knight halberd. It's like, the fuck do you mean? He killed the monster, the loot dropped, he picked it up, and now he has it. Oh, no, you can't use that. It's like, it's in the game, isn't it? Yes. Well, there you go. It's like, what the fuck do you mean? Oh, man. It's like, listen, minimum item level is for people that want to go challenge themselves. It's not for everybody. And it's particularly like, someone like Preach, you might be considering, I want to catch up on the MSQ. I want to see what else is in the game. I don't want to this is a raid that's already been solved. These are things that have ultimately been solved already. I don't need to push myself and prog it and do all of this crazy stuff. You don't have to do it. It's an optional challenge. Like, I can't believe you would disrespect the raid like this. I thought you were hardcore, man. It's like, what the fuck? It's like, get the fuck out of here, dude. What the fuck? Jeez.
The fact that my free company put a group together because they wanted to play with it. So, interestingly enough, even in FF, different game, but the same rules apply that in many people's eyes, playing with friends in an MMO is unfair. So, doesn't matter where you are, there are always going to be people who feel that way. And I would imagine that being the only thing more disrespectful to people's created works is not doing them at all. That would be really bad. But what I decided to do after that is I enjoyed Sky Pirates immensely, by the way. I thought it was absolutely tremendous, and I fully recommend it if you haven't tried it. I went back and I pugged it. Afterwards, I went back and I decided to pug it to get a better feel for it, just to see what would happen in the pugs. Because one thing I was seeing is, with the huge amount of people watching, is like, oh, pugs fail this all the time, because there are some very tricky bosses in there. There were certainly bosses, if I would have seen them, would be like, this is the pug killer, and I was curious to see how it was. Actually worked out fine. It was totally fine, because...
And let me tell you why it works out fine. And the reason Mike goes into this and is like, okay, this boss is going to be the pug killer, it's because he's assuming... the level of performance of your standard World of Warcraft pug. And that's the thing. World of Warcraft, and I've said this multiple times, World of Warcraft does a terrible, absolutely atrocious job of teaching people how to raid. And their solution, when they realize, oh my God, we're not really teaching people how to raid properly, their solution is basically like, well, let's just make a version of the raid where they don't need to learn how to raid. Let's just make looking for raid, and people can go in there and just tank and spank everything into the fucking dirt. Mechanics be damned. It's like, no, Blizzard, that's not the solution. The solution to that problem is you actually teach the people how to raid. You teach them. And then when they know how to raid, you're going to be able to just let them queue into normal raiding. It's not even going to be a problem anymore because they'll know how to do it. But no, Blizzard might have some fantastic raids, but they can't teach their players worth a damn, dude. And not to mention that a lot of their markers are they're not particularly precise. It's like, for instance, you see like a cloud of smoke or something or an animation, and you're like, okay, so which part is the part where I can stand in? Which part is the part that I cannot stand? It's like this whole thing is a fucking giant blur of mist. It's like, I don't know if I'm standing in the right spot or not. It's like, that's the thing. They just need to do a better job of communicating to players when they've made a mistake. So for instance, you look at the group that Mike is in here right now, and you can see there's a whole lot of people making a whole lot of fucking mistakes. And any player that plays Final Fantasy XIV can instantly tell. It's like, oh, looks like Mike over here, he's got 3 pro gamer stacks. The person below him has 5 pro gamer stacks. The one below them has 4 pro gamer stacks. There's only one person here who's not a pro gamer. Everybody else, they've got their pro gamer stacks, dude. But it's like, you see, these stacks are important because they communicate to players. This is a very important mechanic because it gets communicated to players. Hey, you messed up. There was a mechanic there that you failed. Whereas in World of Warcraft, sometimes you'll get hit by a mechanic. You don't even know that you did anything wrong. You don't know. The healers healed you. You're alive. Did I really do anything wrong? I'm dealing damage. Everything seems to be working as appropriate. In this game, it's like, boom, Vuln stack. You're like, oh, I made a mistake. And then, boom, another Vuln stack. Oh, I made a mistake. And if you happen to be doing something like, which one was it? Was it the Lubrum Regini or was it Dalriata? I think it was the Lubrum Regini, where it's like twice comes ruin or whatever it was, where basically you get hit and you get like, hey, here's a debuff. And you're like, oh, that's a shiny little debuff. What is that doing? And it just tells you, if you get hit again, I'm going to kill you. I love that. It's like, no, there's no 5 stacks in this dungeon. It's like, first I'm going to slap you across the face. Then I'm going to shoot you in it. It's like, that's how the game handles mechanics in the Lubrum Regini. The first mechanic failure, that's a slap in the face. The second mechanic failure, that's a shotgun blast to the face, point blank. And nobody's surviving that. It's just straight up doom. You die.
I imagine most people have done it a few times, they understand it, etc., etc. What I can't do is go back and try it at this time. I can't do that. It's not that year. What can I do?
Yeah.
So, what did I find? I want to get back to this mechanic thing. So, overall, the Alliance raids are just tremendous. I love the story-rich element, and I love their purpose in the game is to allow a lot of people who probably don't take part in X content their own piece of the pie to go and enjoy, have a great time in, have their own little bit of progress, which undoubtedly would have happened, and deal with it. But coming back to the mechanics side, which is what really grabbed my balls, right, is we found the feedback and how they very quickly changed their minds on how these raids should work. Now, this is a really cool thing, because what you can see is looking through the feedback at the time. So you might say, we found feedback for the first part of Heavensward, Lost Ark. And the general notes, the feedback then was the bosses were stronger mechanically, felt thematically connected and fitting to that raid, right? So they fit perfectly, but they were too easy. And more people at the time were wiping on the trash than the bosses. Now, I felt that. I felt that very quickly. Like, although we were crushing the trash, the bosses didn't really do much. And often with FF14, especially as I play blind, so I have no idea what's going to happen there, I am laser focused. I don't care about my rotation or anything like that. I'm really laser focused on what does this boss do, because I'm
You don't care about your rotation?
like a sponge. I want to absorb everything that happens, because then I can deal with this boss on every character, focus on my DPS every single time after this. And many people see that when we do like 4 pulls. By then, I'm usually extremely good at the fight. But this is what I like to do. And I was like, oh, well, there's not much happening here. There's a few things on the floor. You know, nothing great. So, what happens then is when they release the second part is they go, okay, we understand. We get what we're saying. So, in the second part, they added more mechanics. They added new challenges. They made it much more difficult. Now, it got to the point where, looking at the feedback from the players at the time, they actually put too much in on certain fights. They actually put too much in. And they was like, this is too much. So they tipped the scales, but not by swinging the hammer, which is what I'm so often used to seeing. It's like, it's too easy. Right, we'll make it super hard. Right? No, they went, it's a little too easy, not much happening here. Little too hard now, little too hard. And then by the time we get to the third part, into the Dunscathe, they pull it back just that little bit more and try and nail it as close as possible as they can, which you can't do, interestingly enough, with just releasing one raid tier. You have to buff and nerf things as you go. You can't really strip out mechanics, otherwise you end up with what we would consider the LFR situation, where certain bosses don't feature the name of the boss at all. Not to say one system's better than the other, because technically, I mean, realistically, you get more content on the WoW side in terms of overall.
Not to say one system's better than the other, but LFR is a fucking shit show.
It's just that it lasts longer and it gets staler for longer, because you're not getting this next piece a little bit down the line. As I said, here, you're getting something at the 0.1, the 0.5. You get a little less each time compared to like a full raid tier, but you get something fresher more regularly, right? To keep you going. And this was really impressive to me. It's like, okay, what exactly is the problem? Right, let's turn it up a little bit. Turn it back a little bit. Just keep adjusting, because we can buff and nerf still. We can still do that, but what we can do is just add a bit more, take a little bit away. And this also allows for something which is very noticeable to me as a critic of these kinds of games. It adapts with how the player base feels at the time. Because they're in real time adjusting the same raid in order to get it into line with how the players feel at the time. And one thing that's always important is your player base changes as time goes on, because they're influenced by the other games that are coming out. What you can't do is stick to your A Realm Reborn formula through and through. That's not going to work, because that's great then, but over time, more and more stuff is happening. More innovation is happening. More introductions of new mechanics is happening. People are discovering new things in other games, and that's going to be influencing you all the way there, and that's going to change your player base. Well, I went and played X. I wish X was in here, and wish Y, and now feel about this way. All these kinds of different opinions.
Mariah Lindo, I'm a role player, so I like LFR because it's a way to see the raid without having to form a dedicated group. Fair. But what if, let's just put this hypothetical out there. What if Blizzard was able to actually teach players how to do the raids? Because right now, the problem with the raids in World of Warcraft is that they come out and, they have mechanics in there and you have to go trial and error. You have to go in there and it's just like it's trial and error. Because the way in which they don't really do a good job of presenting you with the mechanics that they're going to be showing you in the raid. Whereas if you go to something like Final Fantasy XIV, the way in which you engage with the raids, like, for instance, this thing that you're seeing right here, the purple, at least I think that looks like, that's a stack marker. Another mechanic that you see right here is the eye. And by the way, I haven't done this raid in God knows how long because, I don't really have a reason to go do this raid at this point. But it's like, just seeing these two mechanics here, I can tell you that this is a stack marker because it's something that they use universally. And the mechanic that goes around this is that the group has to stack up to share damage, because if they don't, the person that's getting targeted by this is going to die. So this is a stack marker. You're supposed to stack on top of it. Then the eyeball over here, this means that you can't look at the boss. So your character has to physically turn around and not be facing the boss, because if you face the boss, you're going to get hit by a specific mechanic. And this is just like looking at this random freeze frame that I have right here. I can instantly tell you two of the mechanics that are happening. And the thing is, Final Fantasy is very good at reutilizing those mechanics in interesting ways where you'll see it and you'll be like, I know what this mechanic is, because the game has already taught me how this mechanic is supposed to work. And what you end up with is you can just queue into normal raids and people will generally be competent enough to clear those normal raids, and you don't need a situation like an LFR where basically the whole point of it is to ignore mechanics. Like, because to be honest, if like the whole point of doing the LFR thing is to ignore the mechanics that are brought forth from the raid, then just give players like an explorer mode where they can just go in there solo. Like literally just give them a solo version of the raid where a single player can go in there and beat the crap out of the raid. You don't need to bring the other people along. It's just kind of pointless. Impossible, I will need to have the heroic achievement to be able to do normal. What? What do you mean you need an heroic achievement to be able to do normal? Anyway, that's just my thought on that.
Going to happen, and
Aaron G, yeah, it's also one of the reasons why you shouldn't really skip in this game when you're really brand new. Look at the Quinn situation. Exactly. Quinn had no fucking idea what was happening. He literally got hit by like 3 overlapping AoEs. And then he started screaming something about heals. And then he goes and he says, oh, I completely understand the mechanics of the game and I can keep up with, the top level players. It's like, no, you can't. You can't even keep up with the 3 AoEs that were hitting you. What do you mean you can keep up with top level players? Good luck with that. Also, Mr. Quinn, I don't like Final Fantasy story after skipping it. I like World of Warcraft story better. Yes, that gentleman.
you can see, and I can physically see it, and it's very impressive. And especially in the Alliance raiding. There's a little bit of it in the main raid, but I'll come back to that in a different video. But in the Alliance raids, which is designed for the more casual player base, you can clearly see where the frustrations are happening, such as, originally we had all the independent groups, the 3 independent groups, doing different things. But if one of them failed, the whole group wiped. And that's not fun. Because, and I had this experience when I was pugging, is one of the groups just seemed to end up with a lot of the weaker players. Not to say they were terrible or anything, but that group, just because it's randomly assigning players to Group A, Group B, Group C, one of the groups ended up with more of the weaker players. And therefore that group died regularly. And therefore the other players were like having to pick up the slack, but they could. Whereas previously, if you were very segmented, which is what happened, if one of those groups died, you would die. And that made the whole group would die because one group just ended up that way. And therefore, the whole group is getting frustrated because they can't do anything about it. They can't adjust it or anything. And you just kind of have to hope that one group deals with their things. Otherwise, we're just going to remake and all that. Now, I know that sounds awful, but they adjusted that and fixed that. And you can see that happening in real time. I have to say, even though the story is super impressive and all that kind of stuff, this mechanical adjustment to the player base at the time to give what they want, but don't go too far with it, and then reel it back if they go a little too far, as quickly as possible to create the best experience possible.
That Dragoon limit break.
It's one of the most impressive things I've seen from a technical standpoint in FF so far. So overall, I can't wait to see what the next ones are, because I think it goes to like 48 players at some point, and that is really going to be an exciting time for me, for sure, and a very exciting time. So, I mean, what else is there to say?
I have to say, the system is really genius, although in some ways you do get less content, but that content is so regular and in bite-sized chunks and so story-rich that it's hard to not say it's somewhat superior. It doesn't matter what your focus is. If you want the hard stuff, if you want the easy stuff, everybody has something to look forward to here. And you do get that feeling that if I did it in the real time, when it was current, I would be so excited to see what comes next for these non-main story characters. And I really hope to see that continue into the next expansions and see how they adapt this relatively quick style of what did we do wrong, how do we make it better, and how do we make it for our current audience as their mindset changes on exactly what they want. I'll see you again next time when hopefully we'll be able to discuss that. Thanks guys, remember if you enjoyed the videos and you enjoy the stuff we do here, and we have a new office coming, so watch out for that office tour. Make sure you subscribe on our website. See you again. Bye-bye.
It's really, really good stuff. I personally really, really like it. I like the friggin' alliance raids, particularly with Nier. Nier was the first time that I was like all caught up, and I still remember jumping into it was the second Nier trial, because like the first one was already out by the time I got there, but the second that one hit, I think I even have like do I have my first run of that on YouTube? I think I might. Was that patch 5.3? That might have been patch 5.3. I love that one. That one's actually my favorite alliance raid. Is the second one. So good.